An elderly man paid extra for an aisle seat to ease his old war injury, but minutes before takeoff, a flight attendant told him to move. No one cared that he limped. No one noticed the pain on his face, but someone was watching, and what happened next silenced the entire cabin. The boarding area was quiet, just past 6 in the morning at Denver International Airport. Frank Delaney, a 78-year-old Marine Corps veteran, sat motionless by gate 27. He wore a worn tan jacket, black slacks, and shoes that had seen far too many miles. His hands rested on his knees. He waited, like he had done countless times in life, with patience and with purpose. He had booked the flight months ago, stretching his modest pension to afford seat 14C, a premium economy aisle seat with just enough legroom to prevent his damaged left knee from locking up. This was not luxury, it was survival. Frank was flying from Wyoming to Maryland to see something he never thought he would live to witness: his granddaughter graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy. He was proud, but he was also tired. When they called early boarding, Frank rose carefully, leaning slightly on the rail as he made his way down the jet bridge. Each step was deliberate. Inside the plane, he greeted the flight attendant with a soft "thank you" and lowered himself slowly into 14C. His breathing eased. He had made it. But peace does not last long in a world that forgets its elders. A sharp voice soon interrupted. "Excuse me, sir, are you in seat 14C?" Frank looked up. The flight attendant was young, maybe early 30s, with a perfectly neat uniform and practiced smile. Her name tag read Kayla. "Yes, ma'am, I booked it for medical reasons," Frank said calmly. Kayla crouched a little, still smiling. "We have a mother and her 2 kids who were separated during booking. Your seat is the only one that fits all 3. We would really appreciate your help." Frank's brow creased. His knee ached just hearing those words. "I understand," he said slowly, "but I really need this seat. I paid extra for it. My leg does not do well in tighter spaces." Her smile stiffened, professionalism tightening into insistence. "I get it, sir, but this is the only solution. If you do not move, we cannot close the doors, and the flight will be delayed." The words stung more than she realized. Frank looked toward the front of the plane. The mother stood there, holding a toddler, with 2 more young children nearby. The cabin had grown quiet. Eyes turned. Whispers rose. To them, he was suddenly the problem. The man who wore the uniform, who bore the scars, who paid extra so he could walk off the plane with dignity. Now he was holding everyone up. "I'll note your objection," Kayla said coldly, "but I need your decision now." Frank looked down at his hands, scarred, steady. Then he nodded once, quiet and resigned. "My name is Frank Delaney, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. I gave up this seat under pressure. Please note that too." And with that, he stood, limping back down the aisle, alone. If this moment moved you, do not miss what happens next. Subscribe to Mystery Thrill, where stories of dignity, justice, and redemption come alive. Seat 32B was everything Frank Delaney had hoped to avoid: tight, cramped, unforgiving. Wedged between a college kid with oversized headphones and a businessman aggressively typing on a laptop, the seat offered no aisle, no grace, and certainly no space. The overhead light flickered. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Frank settled in with care, his knee protesting every inch. He said nothing. There was no point. No one asked if he was okay. No one noticed the quiet dignity of a man who had once crawled through the jungles of Vietnam to pull 6 wounded Marines from a burning vehicle. They just saw an old man in the way. 3 rows ahead, across the aisle, a woman had seen everything. Her name was Charlotte Hayes. She looked like a business executive, maybe mid-40s. Clean blazer, laptop on her lap, but her eyes were sharp and observant. She had noticed the hesitation in the flight attendant's voice, the limp in the man's stride, the stiffness in his jaw as he tried not to grimace. She also noticed something no one else had: his hands, scarred, thick-knuckled, one finger slightly bent, the kind of bend that came not from arthritis, but from combat. And so, as the rest of the passengers settled in and forgot him, Charlotte pulled out her phone, not to take a picture, not to tweet, but to act. Her message was short, direct. Passenger Frank Delaney,
forced to give up seat 14C despite confirmed booking and medical necessity. Now seated in 32B, flight 306. Please escalate. She sent it to a friend, a quiet connection in the airline's corporate team. Then she placed the phone down and stared out the window. She did not know what would come of it, but some things you do not stay silent for. Frank sat still, his hands resting quietly on his lap. Each time the pain sharpened, he shifted slightly just enough to keep it from locking in. The college kid beside him never looked up. The businessman kept typing, elbow over the shared armrest like it was his desk. Frank was not angry. He had lived long enough to know what it felt like to be an inconvenience, but he was tired, so tired. Up front, Captain David Miller was reviewing pre-flight checks. A 23-year veteran of the Air Force, he had flown more than 11,000 hours. Precision was second nature, but when a red notification pinged his cockpit screen, passenger concern flagged. Frank Delaney, veteran, forced from aisle seat due to policy conflict. He froze. The name Delaney struck him. He turned to his co-pilot. "Hold the taxi." "Captain, 3 minutes. I will be right back." David stepped out of the cockpit, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket and brushing the gold flight bars on his shoulders. Calm, focused, commanding. Passengers noticed the shift. The air changed. He walked the aisle slowly until he reached row 32, and there, hunched beneath the dim light, was Frank Delaney. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then, Captain Miller raised his right hand and gave a sharp, formal salute. It was silent, reverent, and it stopped the flight cold. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, on behalf of Transcontinental Airlines and as a fellow serviceman, I offer you my deepest apologies. Frank blinked. He could not find words. You should not have been asked to give up your seat. We're going to make it right. The passengers, once so indifferent, now watched silently. Something inside the cabin shifted, something unspoken. Charlotte felt it, and the man who once felt invisible was now being seen.
Passengers stared in stunned silence as the captain stood tall, still holding his salute to the elderly man wedged into the middle of row 32. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, veteran of the United States Marine Corps, blinked, unsure if this moment was real. The businessman beside him shifted uncomfortably. The college student on the other side lowered his headphones. No one could look Frank in the eye except Captain David Miller, who waited, not out of protocol, but out of genuine respect. I want to personally apologize to you, Staff Sergeant. You should never have been asked to give up your seat. That was our mistake, and we are going to correct it. Frank tried to speak, but his voice failed him. The entire cabin had fallen silent. Passengers sat straighter in their seats. Even the flight attendants, who had been so quick to shuffle him aside, now watched with visible discomfort. The captain turned. "Miss Kayla Bennett," he said. The young flight attendant, the same one who had made Frank move, stepped forward slowly, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice smaller now. "You will personally escort Staff Sergeant Delaney to seat 1A. She blinked. "Sir, first class is fully booked. We don't have—" "If 1A is occupied," Captain Miller interrupted without raising his voice, "you will ask for a volunteer. If no one offers, explain that the captain of this aircraft is requesting that seat on behalf of a decorated combat veteran. And if that still fails—" He paused, letting the cabin hold its breath. "Then I will give up my seat." Gasps rippled quietly through the plane. Kayla nodded, pale. "Yes, sir." Frank's hands trembled as he reached for his duffel bag. "Captain, you do not need to—" Miller placed a firm hand on Frank's shoulder. "Let us do this right, please." Charlotte Hayes, the woman in row 5 who had reported the incident, watched as Frank stood. This time, he rose with dignity, his stiff legs struggling, but his shoulders straight. As he stepped into the aisle, something extraordinary happened. The entire row shifted. The college kid stood up and muttered, "I'm sorry, sir." The businessman avoided his gaze. One man removed his cap and pressed it to his chest. Not a word was said,
but the silence was filled with reverence. Kayla led Frank slowly down the aisle. The further he walked, the more people turned to look. One woman reached out gently to touch his arm. A child whispered to her mother, "Is he a hero?" When they reached the front, Kayla turned to the man seated in 1A. He was sipping sparkling water, oblivious. "Sir," she said softly, "we need to reassign your seat." "Why?" He frowned. "The captain is requesting it, for someone who has served." He turned, saw Frank, saw the duffel, the scars, the weariness in his face, and stood up without a word. "It's an honor," the man said quietly, stepping aside. Frank settled into the wide leather seat. He did not speak. His hands rested gently on his knees. It was not comfort he felt. It was something deeper, recognition. Captain Miller turned one last time toward the cabin. His gaze swept across the passengers. "If that seat had not been offered," he said clearly, "I would have reassigned my co-pilot's jump seat. And if that had not worked," he paused, "I would have flown this plane standing." The cabin sat in stillness as Frank Delaney settled into 1A. He did not smile, he did not speak, but something had shifted. This was not about comfort anymore. It was about being seen. A blanket was gently placed across his knees, a bottle of water in his hand. But he barely noticed. His thoughts drifted until a soft voice rose from halfway down the aisle. "Staff Sergeant Delaney?" Frank turned. A man stood in row 8, shaved head, late 30s, jeans and a plain hoodie. His eyes were wet. "I served under you. Camp Leatherneck, 2006. You saved my life. We never got to thank you." Frank's jaw clenched. Emotion rose in his chest. He nodded just once, but the look said more than words ever could. The entire cabin felt it. Captain Miller moved to the intercom and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady, "before we depart, I need to make a brief announcement." The passengers turned. "Today, a mistake was made. A man who served this country, who carries both visible and invisible scars, was asked to surrender his seat, not because of an error, but because of policy. Policy that valued convenience over honor." A quiet gasp. No one moved. "But I believe we do not leave our own behind, not in combat and not at 30,000 feet." His voice deepened. "Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He served with distinction in Quezon. He booked seat 14C for a reason, a medical reason. He did not ask for special treatment. He asked only to be respected." He paused. "We failed him, but we had a chance to make it right, and that's what matters." He stepped away from the mic. The silence cracked, first by one pair of hands clapping, then another, until the cabin erupted in applause. Not loud, not rowdy, but deeply human. Frank did not bow, he did not wave, he simply sat quietly, hands folded, eyes misted, his dignity restored. When they landed in Annapolis, the jet bridge opened. Frank was the last to disembark, not because he moved slow, but because he was no longer in a hurry. For once, he did not feel forgotten. Charlotte Hayes met him at the door. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You reminded all of us," she whispered, "what honor still means." At baggage claim, his granddaughter was waiting. Navy uniform, crisp, holding a sign, "Welcome Grandpa Frank." When she saw him, she ran. He dropped his duffel and braced for the hug. "Your knee," she gasped. "I've had worse," he smiled. And this time, the smile reached his eyes. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived, not from the airline, but from the Department of the Army. A service record had been rediscovered, an old report documenting how Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney had pulled 6 wounded Marines from a burning vehicle under heavy fire, even after his leg was shattered by shrapnel. At the bottom, a handwritten note. You were never invisible, not to us. And across the country, a quiet woman named Charlotte Hayes submitted a story. No embellishments, no drama, just truth. The story of a man asked to move, and a flight that stopped, saluted, and stood still for justice. Pray that if this story made you feel anything, anger, hope, pride, then you belong with us. Subscribe to Mystery Thrill, where the quiet heroes get the loudest echoes. Because sometimes the simplest act of decency rewrites history.